This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial, and it's the 27th day of September 2020. And I want to discuss with you this time of the year, prairie starts to look a little scruffy, especially when it's in a manicured lawn. So I'm going to take you to the Big Dig and explain it a little bit. It's a rather wonderful experience. And then say something about how a prairie breaks down and how you should enjoy how it breaks down. So I'm going to take you from Weft by the MTD building and under the viaduct for the railroad line and along Chestnut Street to a gentleman that has a little shop there that's for plants. He's out on the street today and people are enjoying his shop. And then across First Street to Clark Street, and there's a coffee shop on the corner that you can buy coffee and sit outside. And we're going just a little further and we come to a couple of pollinator plots, but you look over the detention pond. The detention pond is a huge creation, a multi-million-dollar Big Dig. So it takes the Boneyard Creek down and provides space for water to accumulate and not go into Green Street on Campustown or other places. It's an attempt to detain the water for a period, it might even be a week, with drains that allow the water to come down the boneyard and lift up into the detention pond. When that water gets under White Street, where there's a bridge under White Street, it gets into a bigger pond and accumulates, and when there's a 5-inch rainfall, it will be up and over the walkways, which is intentional. And then there are a couple of elevated places where water is pumped up and creates waterfalls, and this is purposefully to provide aeration. There's another aeration device in the middle of the pond. The least thing you want in a urban setting is, with houses all around, is to have a swampy pond that is not clean. So we're going to go back to the parking lot, a nice parking lot. This is a site where people can park their car easily and then run the prairie or bring their bicycle and do the same. So I'm going to walk past a couple of pollinator plots that have prairie plants in them, and they're maturing at the present time. The rattlesnake master especially. There are some asters and there's some drop seed, a lot of drop seed. It's a very refined prairie plant and it's rather elegant. Now I'm standing outside the parking lot and letting you look over the detention pond. It is in lawn. It has an underpinning of clay that allows it to not leak, but to accumulate the water. It has a decent slope down. You have to imagine that this was 2 or 3 blocks of houses that have been removed, and then tons and tons of soil have been taken out to provide room for water that otherwise got into Green Street, and you could row a boat or a canoe on Green Street, so people could not use their basement spaces on Green Street, and it was kind of iffy. So the water comes from two directions, one from the north, and even some of that has been channeled off before it even gets to the detention pond. It goes under University Avenue, and I'm walking around to a sort of horticultural plot, which is really a rain garden. A rain garden is where water accumulates, and you create a space for plants to grow, and if you have reasonable soil, they will grow and save you having runoff. Well, the slope we have into that pond is not awfully great, but it's enough to keep it going. Water-loving plants probably will be a little dry in summertime, but at the moment it is in the middle where it's a little damper. They're iris-type plants, or they're nicely green at the moment when the drop seed around and the dried images of purple cornflower and yellow cornflower, and the New England asters are still blooming, and there's still just a touch of butterfly weed. And a few milkweeds and some evening primrose. So if you go there late at night, the evening primrose will still be in flower, only a little bit at the top. It's gone to seed right now, but there's a little plot that was purposely planted. So there's accommodation for seating and some booths that you can use as a table, and the chairs, and they're rainproof, so they have a tent over or an umbrella over, so you don't have to have the heat of the sun, and people enjoy sitting there. So there's a relationship between this horticultural plot, this prairie. If you have enough water, there's been planted some cardinal plants in it, but cardinal plants traditionally need a lot of water. So I don't know whether they're going to continue there. But there's clovers, prairie clover, and it sits on top of two humongous pipes that come under University Avenue, and this plot is totally artificial, sitting on top of the boneyard, which is running underneath. If you look north, you can actually see this little rivulet that comes in from the north of town underneath University Avenue. And then, surprise, surprise, right against University Avenue with all its interstate and local traffic, here is a little pocket prairie with trees in it too. There's some hydrangeas, and some trees have been left from the original workings. This is a multi-million-dollar place, but it's enabled some trees to remain. You can walk around that plot, enjoy it, and sit and watch it. It's different in different seasons, and right now it's haying off. You can choose to leave it hay off. In urban settings, sometimes there's a temptation to mow it, but I think its character is better if it is not mown. So now we're walking to the other side of this plot. It's a little to the south, and it looks over the boneyard as it comes out from underneath the University Avenue. It's a nice little creek. It's been allowed to meander. Uh, Creeks don't do very well if they're given square bends. They like to have sigmoid curves. And there's two types of stone here. There's a sedimentary stone that people sit on, and it's cheaper than remnant stones. They're called Glacial Erratics. They come with the glacial till from Canada, from the Laurentian Shield, and they rounded off, have been held in or under or on top of glaciers that came, continental glaciers, and so they're rounded. And very few of them reach here. Most, the big ones, the size of a house, drop out in Canada and then gradually get smaller and smaller till you get very few glacial erratics in east central Illinois. And those glacial erratics, if you buy them, are like $200 and $300 and $400 if they're a big one. If that's 3 foot across, is big. And there are smaller ones. So the meandering Boneyard Creek has glacial erratics there, and that's where you usually find them. On the slope into the detention pond, we have three little prairies. They're doing very well. The two that are a little higher have done very well. The one in the middle doesn't do very well, but it will grow in time, and we'll put some more wetland species in there. And at the moment it's growing, it's a little on the weedy side. There's juncus and other plants that can survive water. So we selected that, but we didn't really be in quite the right place. It's open, so our plants that needed shade from shade-loving plants didn't survive. So bloodroot and wild ginger and plants that are understory plants in a forest edge didn't survive. We tried to give them a little shade. You can do that. You can take a material called Cylon, and it comes in different sort of shade capacity. So you can take plants and grow them in the shade that they love. It might be, if they're a purple cornflower, they might be normally 25 feet away from the edge timber. So that means you have a certain sort of amount of sunlight. These plants have adapted for many, many, many years, and they've found niches. And if you want to grow them, you can grow them away from a niche, but they do much better if you can find the niche that they have. So I'm standing looking down the boneyard, and that's rather nice. So having done that, I walk to the south side of the boneyard, and the walkway gradually goes down into the detention pond, commonly called the Big Dig, because it was really a big dig. And I don't know what its capacity is, but it's huge. And in a big storm, it fills up. Perhaps a third of it will be water. The slopes are interesting. I was there just a few moments ago, and children were rolling down sideways down the slope. There's enough slope to allow that to happen, and their parents were sitting on the rocks. So it's an interesting place to be. So I'm walking down. I walk past a little plot where a turtle laid its eggs, and some of the walking crowd, parents and children, watched this event and were rather amazed that it's happening in an urban place, which is partly between the campus and Champaign. So it's called Midtown. But at the same place just the other day, I saw a nice little snake. Uh, it was working its way across the concrete. It's not so easy for it to do that. But once it get it off the concrete into the grass, it did very well and disappeared. I've seen a couple of snakes lately, and it's good to see that wildlife is making it. I don't know whether it's stocked, but it has little fingerlings in the water, and when there's no rain, there's little puddles, and there are waterfalls where the boneyard drops down and then later will be pumped up and taken out slowly so it doesn't flood campus town. Right as you turn the corner and walk down, there's a conversazione area, and there's some benches, and it's big enough to have 5 or 6 or 10 people, usually only 1 or 2 or 3, but there's stone walkway, and you can walk up to where that boneyard comes out from under the University Avenue, and you could hardly imagine, except that you hear the traffic to some extent. But once you get into the pond, the vegetation helps to drop the sound so that you feel very nice. And children will take off their shoes and walk in the boneyard. I wouldn't recommend that because you might just hit some glass. So if you have flip-flops to protect your feet, that's probably okay. The geese that are in the deeper pond don't come to the shallow pond because they like the water. So only when the pond is flooded do geese appear, and ducks too. They tend to like the bigger pond to the south. So there's a north pond north of White Street and a south pond south of White Street. That's an extension of Logan. Logan comes in on a railroad plat, and White is a Jeffersonian plat in north, south, east, and west. So there's a junction between those 2 plats. I'm going to visit the bridge that has an access corridor underneath it, so if there were geese or ducks, they could communicate with the other pond. But usually there's a waterfall there, and it aerates the water, and it's a popular place for people to stop. If you turn around and look now, you'll see the 2 plots of prairie. One of them is more biodiverse than the other, but they're both expressing themselves. We could extend them a little bit. There's 1 or 2 plants that are cultivar plants. They're grasses that get to be seeding in from the surrounding prairie. The planners, the organizers in the first place have suggested to put prairie around the walkways, and so yes, it's a small spectrum. It's not a huge variety, but there's blue stem and Indian grass and some bootaloo and or side oats and some little blue stem, and it just gives the idea of a prairie. It lets people understand their heritage ecosystem. The pocket prairie came from Market Street, just opposite WFT, and it is been converted into a beer garden, and the building next door is a bar, and they've done very nicely, and we had to move the prairie, and the city wanted to take it to the detention pond, so that's where it is. You can walk around it gently. You can look for the traditional symbols of prairie, the dock and the compass plant. You can see the last of the season's flowers, the New England aster and boneset and goldenrod. And 2 weeks ago, this gave a yellow and white and slightly blue ambiance. Now those plants have died, and they start to fall over. The New England aster is really fairly young, and frost aster is also fairly young, so they look crisp yet, but the grasses are hanging off. And this is a time when you think about burning a prairie, but you might not want to do it in an urban setting. You have to have the fire department come and check you out, and often we have to teach the fire department how to burn a prairie. And you don't necessarily burn all of it. You burn it. Sometimes it's better to burn it in midwinter when there's some snow around, so that it doesn't burn completely. Because there's some species in prairie, and these include bacteria and others in the soil, that would prefer not to be burned, and that gives them a chance to survive. So sometimes you have a problem with people who need to do a rectilinear burn and see that every corner is burned. But that's not really so. The city has burned a portion of this prairie, and it's growing very nicely as a result. If you don't burn a prairie, it's been so many thousands of years that it has been burned, mostly by lightning, but also by Native American people. It's got used to being burned, and if it doesn't burn it, it doesn't do very well. On the other hand, you don't need to burn it too much, because burning too much will make the species be more prone to fire, so something that is soft and elegant will die, and the plant that is got a harsh leaf will survive in a prickly background. So it becomes more like a desert environment. It's now we're at the bridge. We can see the buses go across at the top, and there's a little conversation area, and then there's a stairwell to paradise. So there's several stairwells, and mainly 2 stairwells that you can run up and down and enjoy their country stone, and you can get your jollies out of deciding where you want to put your foot, and be careful about doing it. And you get to the top, you've expended some energy, and you can enjoy looking down on the pond. Now we're going to go across Wright Street. You be careful, because the buses use that corridor regularly, and there's a bollard on either side. A bollard is a device that prevents cars from driving on the walkway, which is wide, 10 foot wide. There's mowing on either side of that. And it has a hinge, and you could unlock a lock and put the bollard down, so maintenance vehicles can get in there. But usually it blocks other vehicles. And so there's one on either side of Wright Street. Then you go down onto the bigger pond. Uh, you can see a aeration device. It's interesting because the creatures like to be in this moving water, so they will settle at about the level that they like to enjoy, whether it's ducks or geese or the occasional heron uh, and other birds. I was seeing this morning some swallows, and every once in a while, if you're patient enough, there will be interesting things happen uh, amongst the geese and the ducks, and they interact with each other. And you have to know that their squawks mean something there. The geese sort out partnership for life, and the ducks do likewise. And there are three white ducks that are always there by themselves. So we going down and down, down. So you're getting to the lower point of the boneyard now. But there's a waterfall, which is where water is pumped up to the level of the buildings that have been built around that look over this pond. And I think it has meant some interesting income for people who live near the pond, because the pond gives you some ambience to look at, and people living there enjoy being close, and they will go to the coffee shop nearby, and sometimes we get volunteers that come from that sort of background. The geese, I don't know what is going on with the geese, but they have lost 175 in Urbana, and I think they've decided that they don't belong too excessively in the pond area, or they may be exterminated when they get too many. There's been sometimes 100 geese, a lot of geese. That's too many. But I had a relative family here, my niece, her husband, and her 5-year-old son, their 5-year-old son. And he was just old enough to want to pet the geese. So he walked out into the stones that are in the pond, hoping that he could commune with the goose, not knowing that the goose was going to move on. They're not going to be involved with that sort of thing. But the geese seemed to understand that this was a young fellow, and he managed to jump across rocks, but then coming back, he didn't know how to jump. So it was a little frightening. So father had to rescue him. And so these sorts of little things go on, and you meet with people. And fortunately, there's some feeding of the geese, so they get to know that. And so if you stand too long on a bridge over the waterfall, you'll have geese and ducks almost begging for some food. The park district or the city would prefer you not do that, because it really encourages the creatures. But it's almost like a zoo, and you watch, and there's a green blush at the moment on the pond, and that's algal, and it's because there's fertilizer that's gone onto the lawns especially, and there's an excess that comes down in the boneyard water, and that grows algae, and the geese like to graze on that rather than grazing on the lawns, which also are pretty ideal for geese. They appreciate the mowing. It gives rise to little shoots. Sometimes they can overgraze and get to the point of needing to be controlled so that you don't have too much of that sort of action. And now we're walking a little further, and there's uh, an area that is set aside as a sort of auditorium, or a place where you can sit and where a band can play. And that's nice. And right in the middle of the island that is created by that uh, area is a tree that has buttress roots. And buttress roots help to support a tree. So the trees are probably only 10 years old, and they're growing, but they grow fast. It's really amazing how big a tree can expand to in 20 or 50 years. Now we're going up the slope, and there's a couple of tables and chairs and umbrellas, and people sit there and talk to each other, and they can look now north across the green pond with the algae in it, and grazing geese enjoying the algae. Now you're at another pumping station, and now the water is being pumped up. It's also being aerated, but this will eventually go into the boneyard on the other side of Springfield Avenue, where the forest preserve, not the forest preserve, the Champaign Park District has a plot of land that is almost a square block with recreation and the like. So right there is the remnants of a bridge. And this is because a banner was probably 5 miles from where they put the railroad bed. And the railroad bed likely was placed where it is because the landscape was reasonable, or you don't know whether there were any political force that forced that sort of decision. But certainly West Urbana got to be established, and it became the commercial town because it was in and around the railroad line. And Urbana people had to get to the railroad station, and they had this little horse-drawn railroad that went to Wright Street and then got into Urbana territory, and it eventually became electrified in Champaign, but Urbana still kept it as a horse-drawn activity, and eventually the trolley system became electrified, and both groups had a catenary over the area where the tramway was, and so that was just one or two cars. It could also serve as freight. There'd been a recent movement to do like the Europeans do. Sometimes after 1 o'clock at night, the local tram track becomes a place for transportation, food for the next day, or facilities, and it works reasonably well. We have chosen not to do that. There was an attempt to recreate this sort of rail and service between Champaign and Campustown and then Urbana. Didn't happen, and it's not to say that it mightn't happen in the future, but if you want to recreate the right-of-way for that sort of thing, you almost have to run down existing roads, because it's almost impossible to recreate a right-of-way. That was a sort of tram track that you could pick up at certain stations, or you could, if the driver was willing, would pick you up when you put your hand up to say we wanted to get on. Some of those vehicles are still around. They were operating they still operate in San Francisco. They were operating in Cincinnati. They were efficient. It was at the time of the demise of those trains. They started in 1905 with electricity, and then continued to 56 in Champaign. But the trolley cars were still efficient, and they got sold to other communities that still have that sort of facility, either for a tourist attraction or for a functional use. Some places like Pullman, Washington, have active trolley lines, and they do run down the road in most cases, or they have saved the right-of-way so that you don't have to recreate it. So there's a little bridge there that used to be where horses took trolleys over, then electricity, and it's a little bit of history. Now you're going to go over to Scott Park. Scott was a previous mayor of Champaign, and it's a Scott family that's well known, and it's probably about 15 acres, and it has the boneyard going through now at the traditional level. You pumped up the water and moved it through, and it's allowed to meander. The plants are prairie plants, planted by people who knew what they were doing, and there are some plots that are by themselves, nice circular sites where basically all monard or basically all Culver's root, and they're interesting plots. The riverbanks are covered with prairie plants, and at this time you can hardly see the creek because the vegetation has grown for its summer. The grasses especially are 6 and 8 feet tall, and they cover the river banks. So I stand looking towards the high-rise buildings of Urbana, and it's nice to be able to take a photograph of the boneyard and the high-rise buildings in the background. And those are the people that are beginning to enjoy these two plots of nature that serve for other purposes, but also allow for hiking and biking and just sitting. So I walk along the periphery on the west side, and there are milkweeds to attract butterflies, especially monarchs, and there are fairly almost cultivar purple coneflowers. Right now, they just ahead, and New England aster and boneset, which is white, and frost aster, and you can walk around in several different ways. I walk past a sign which tells you about a rain garden. They've made a pond area where water can be impounded and sink in. It was not totally well drained, which is the point of a rain garden. But eventually, for some reason or other, it has been drained a little bit, but it's still a rain garden, and it has wetland species that you don't get in other places. But then the banks are at the moment looking a little scruffy. You only have to have somebody lose a basketball in the middle of the prairie, and it will fall over and stay over. And the so you're working with recreation and preservation at the same time, and there's a basketball court and a kiosk where people can play bridge or whatever they want to do, and there's a little area which allows you to sit and think, and it looks on the prairie as it goes round and meander. And then you go to where the water goes into underground tunnels, 2 8 feet tall tunnels that take the boneyard through Campus Town, sight unseen. It used to be an open ditch, and people would fall into it, and all sorts of garbage would be there. So it's now entrenched in walk-through sized tunnels that allow for a huge amount of water. There's an addition of some water coming from the south, where there was a Neal Street pond, which kept accumulating a little bit like the Green Street pond. And that one joins and provides a little more nature, or a little more water, shortly to be covered. And it comes out in places near the engineering area and on through Banner. And the Banner is looking to perhaps have a trail along there too. So these things all connect and give you a community resource that is kind of interesting. And if you watch it, the number of people that use it is quite amazing. Now we're turning around and coming back along the prairie, and we're watching the aster. The New England aster came from New England. It's come west. The frost aster is looking white, and little flowers, and photographers can enjoy these sights. There are plants that came early in the spring, going to seed now. There's golden Alexander and penstemons, and these are plants that are diplomats, and they express themselves fairly well. So they are popular in places like this where you need some feedback. You're not in a position to recreate an original remnant prairie. It's going to be a simulation. And now we're looking at what is very elegant with very few weeds. And so there's some trees, and the trees have been there while this was a landscaped area with houses, and some of them are fairly huge. And one of them has a bowl where a limb has been cut off, and it's healed over. And sometimes those areas are taken by people who have lathes, and they can make a bowl out of them. And that's how some of the early settlers survived. They had wooden bowls that were in that sort of situation. So one of the trees especially is rather tall, and I think there's some catalpa, and I look for this seed that is growing, and the occasional milkweeds, and the goldenrod has recently been there, not overwhelming, which is good. And so now we're looking back on the recreational part of the park, and then going back across Springfield Avenue, and then we'll go on the east side of the uh, pond, which is more or less a straight walkway with a opening in the middle of it with a staircase that runs down. It's the sort of place where uh, weddings are likely to be photographed, and where people will sit on the steps and enjoy. And there's a fence, and the trail bends out, and you can look over at the uh, geese, and you can see the geese when they want to exercise their wings. They flap them, and it makes a noise, and you can just get to communicate with the animals. And uh, right there, there's a storm drain that comes in, and that attracts smaller birds and like swallows, and uh, sometimes the ducks sit around that particular entrance. So that's about a quarter mile long, and it goes way back to where we started, uh, where you can look over and see where mud has accumulated, and that attracts wildlife, worms and whatever, mussels that get harvested. So it's a place that's friendly. You can see the geese take off, and you can watch how they come back in with their feet forward and just sink into the water. And so this is a release. Uh, it's the sort of place where people can feel something of nature. And sometimes hospitals enjoy these sorts of places because we're beginning to realize that some of our diseases are the result of mentality. And sometimes the therapy is to commune with nature and to have some sort of feeling for it. And it creates a feeling within yourself. So if you've lost a loved one and you are in or a medical situation, and it's the sort of place where hospitals, if they're near to these sorts of sites, can have a walkway where someone with a heart problem can walk for a sort of designated distance, or where a therapist can take someone that is otherwise unable to just enjoy the scenery. And so I'm rather proud of this uh, city for doing this and creating an atmosphere for uh, nature on the walkways. Such a wide concrete walkways. It's wide enough for you to have a bicycle, and sometimes there's very small powered bicycles can go there too. Uh, the areas around are gradually growing, and they will take advantage of this, and people will enjoy those. That's opportunity. In a virus time, you can walk this territory and feel that you're distancing from other people, and you're out in the open, and there's ultraviolet light, and there's a feeling, and there's a sound of waterfalls, and the sound of animals talking to each other, and that's rather wonderful. Uh, this is not the only place that does this sort of thing. There's another detention pond to the west of town, and it has the same experience of tall plants falling over at this time of the year. If you're a biologist and you know that big blue stem will fall in like skittles, uh, that's rather wonderful to see. But if it falls onto a manicured lawn, it can be an anathema. So we have that problem of a little bit of conflict between the people who have gotten used to a formal garden style and a more relaxed garden style. Prairies don't necessarily find themselves in rectilinear plots. They tend to move out and about in a kidney-shaped fashion, or anything that suits them, and and suits the niches into which they fit. So you also have to think as you're walking how you manage these plants. Do you put in signs? Well, yes, you can put in signs, but if you put a name on every prairie plant, you're going to eventually come up with a sign desert or a prairie that is filled with signs. Same for trees. We look at the trees; they have mulch around them, and I tend to think of a tree being a place where you can lean up against the tree and sit there. And this doesn't always work with my idea of a tree. And so you can play hide and seek around it if you're a child, and you can enjoy it. So, and I fancy that some of these manicured areas which are mulched are also herbicides because there's very little weeds. There's also a conflict about, do you let the prairie run over the trail? There are some trails in Chicago that actually let the people's backyards back onto the rail trail, and their plants will invade the rail trail, and the people who manage the rail trail don't exactly get too upset if you have to ride your bicycle around something that's invading the trail a little bit. So it makes it look like a little less like concrete and a little more like nature. Even if it's cultivars that are coming out, that's plants that are cultivated, or horticultural plants that aren't necessarily, they might have had a derivative in the prairie, but they're not necessarily prairie plants. So Banner is going through this at the moment, and I'm not quite sure what Banner is doing, but they're remanicuring their Crystal Lake Park, maybe for the better in the future, but it will take many years to accumulate the nature that has grown, probably for 100 years. So there's been some debate about this situation, and it wouldn't hurt you to go walk around to see what is happening and how it might rejuvenate in the future. Part of the effort is to create a lake that doesn't stagnate. You need it to have some aeration, and you need to have it somewhat open for wildlife. That doesn't always work out, and wildlife also has a tendency to poop on places that you would like to sit on. So there's some conflict between human animals and animals that don't belong to the human race, but they have their own language and their own background too. So we enjoy visiting with them, and when they get exterminated, there's a question, and that's good too, to let people know how they feel with each other, and so there's an interaction between various members of the board or members of the public and the board, and so I want you to go to a natural area like Meadowbrook Park and the pond at the west side of Champaign, another detention pond, and little pieces of prairie here and there. Some of them are pollinator plots, not quite the same. It usually includes some cultivars, and some of the cultivars like clover, sweet clover, are prairie people's weeds. But we live with each other, and 1/3 of our food is pollinated, and we're losing the pollinators and bees at a very rapid rate. The bees are subject to varying problems, mites, and a number of different diseases that are not well defined a lot. But last year we lost a lot of bee colonies. I'm going to encourage you to visit that detention pond and give credit to the city for doing it. It's not easy. It took a lot of North End houses out, but it's created an atmosphere that is used by North End people as well as other people, and it's done in a rather nice manner. It's the sort of thing where you would like to encourage people to think about landscape architecture and planning these sorts of environments. And if you're clever, you can balance nature with nurture and cultivated plants that are there. I'm getting close to the end here. I have had the problem of trying to do this as a radio program with WEFT and as a video program with Banner Public Television. And if we're lucky, we'll put a video version of this. It will be totally different. It'll be a media version of this program, and often the videos or still photograph or the diagram will give you a chance to understand the whole process and work with it. This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WAFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial, and it's the 27th of September, almost near to October.